Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Gini Dietrich. Gini, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
I think I need to get my book for your background back there.
I would send it over, and I will add it to the collection.
It
keeps growing. Yeah,
I'm sure it does. Yeah,
the bookshelf has filled up, and now books are going.
You're going across.
And this is just the office. The whole house is a whole other thing. But okay, well let's talk about you. We're not here to talk about my book collection. You are the founder and CEO of Spin Sucks, a communication strategy firm where you also work with agencies. You have offerings for agency owners and so forth. And you've developed a very unique kind of media model, which I want to talk about because there's a lot of value in having a model or a framework, and we've certainly seen this as well. But I'd love to start off maybe with like the name Spin Sucks. Where does that come from? and the fact that we're talking about that means that it's working,
right?
But yeah, where's the name Spin Sucks come from?
So when you, as a communications professional, when you're, sitting next to someone on a plane, or you're in the elevator, or you meet someone at a cocktail reception and they ask you what you do and you say PR, you get one of two responses usually. And usually it's, oh, you lie for a living. And you're like, no, nice to meet you too, but I don't.
Yeah.
Or you get, oh, you're one of those spin doctors. And that just drives me crazy because this is what Hollywood and politicians have done for the industry, is make it look like we are either party planners or we lie for a living and spin messages to get out, to make people look better. And so we were sitting in our conference room 1,000 years ago, and we were talking about this blogging thing that was coming to the forefront. What is blogging? And is it something that we should offer to our clients? And how should we figure it out? And so we decided to test it on ourselves and launch a blog. And one of our interns said, well, you really hate it when people say that you spin for a living. What if we called it Spin Sucks? And we were all like, woo! Yes, let's do it. And so that URL was available, and that's what we did.
But there we go. I love that. It kind of reminds me of like marketers. People always say marketers ruin everything, right? You think you have one good idea, or you find something and all of a sudden it works for a while, but then stops working because so many people are just doing the same thing. Or kind of salespeople, right? The stereotypical salesperson is somebody that nobody likes because nobody likes being sold to, and they're just being salesy and promotional. But a true salesperson is the exact opposite. It's like, a true marketer is not someone who's just trying to pound you with like messages that are not relevant over and over. They actually care about you. They want to deliver value to you. Right. And I would say the same thing obviously is for somebody in PR or communications, right? It's not about telling lies, it's about telling the truth. So
that's right. Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So take me back to that day. I mean, you mentioned, and it sounds kind of like the business was built on the back of a blog, which to me is interesting. And I don't know if that's correct or not, but our business, Consulting Success, it was actually a different name when we first started. We also built it on a blog. We just started kind of like sharing our ideas of what we had learned over, at that point, it was already a decade plus of building consulting businesses. And so we just wanted to share like what was working, what wasn't working, hopefully to help people avoid some mistakes and, be successful sooner. Take me to your story. Like what you had this blog, give me a little more detail. Like what do you do and how did that kind of lead to the business being, moving forward from there?
So I had an agency, I have an agency. And we were probably 3 or 4 years in at that point. And, it was really focused on media relations, getting the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and TechCrunch and all those, and reputation management. And what we found is that it was really great business when you got stories placed, but you only get the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal once. It's not like they're going to cover your client 16 times a month. It's just not going to happen. And so you had these peaks and valleys, and it was like, okay, great. We got some great coverage. And then you have this valley of sparseness in the desert, right? And clients don't like paying for the valley, right? They're like, okay, well, what are we going to do next? And you're like, well, we're preparing. And they just they don't like to hear that. And so one of the things we were always thinking about is how do we sort of stabilize and make things consistent so that we don't have the peaks and the valleys, and we can keep clients happy and measure our results to things that they care about. And this was at the same time that the Great Recession hit. So we had a little bit of extra time to kind of think through what was next. Social media was becoming a thing. Blogging was becoming a thing. All this stuff was happening at the same time. And we discovered that we could add on to our services. So we did. We launched the blog in 2009, and it was a disaster. Like every year. Yeah. Oh, it's so bad. Every year I published the first blog post on our anniversary, just to show people that sometimes you just have to get out there and do it. And it's going to be cringeworthy and it's going to be terrible, but may not be cringeworthy at the time, because it's, what you're thinking, and 10 years later, it's going to be cringeworthy because you've expanded and you've evolved and you have more wisdom and all those kinds of things. Right. I mean, terrible. It's embarrassing how bad it was.
You mean like it looked bad, or the writing was bad?
The content was bad. Like it wasn't even good college writing. It was like an 8th grader wrote it. It's terrible.
And were you writing this, or somebody else was writing this?
Oh, no. Yeah, no.
Okay. So you were just putting out terrible blog posts. Okay.
Terrible blog posts. And what we did is we actually went through and said, okay, there were 30 of us at the time and everybody took a turn writing. So the interns all the way up. So I had a blog post once a month and the interns had a blog post once a month. Right. No consistency, no messaging, no editorial oversight, no SEO, no images, like nothing. So bad. It was so bad. It was so bad. But because of the way that we did it, and eventually I took it over myself and started as the lead blogger, and I would get on my soapbox about things like spin sucks and we don't lie for a living and we do have ethics, and we started to attract like-minded people. And so it gained momentum and it started to evolve and it became a book. And then I went on the book tour and I did the whole, that whole kit and caboodle for a year. And then we started doing trainings and online courses, and it just evolved into something. And probably about 5 years ago, I split the two businesses. So the agency is over here and SpinSucks is over here doing its own thing.
Okay. And what's the agency called?
Dietrich.
Okay. There we go. Yeah. There's a couple of things that you talked about that I want to dig a little bit deeper into. You mentioned that clients, who are, it sounds like we're on a retainer, so paying on a monthly basis, we're not necessarily happy when they weren't landing that big media feature, right? So they're just focusing on like, what do you do? What are we doing this month? What are we getting? They're not necessarily thinking about like, the ROI in total. It's more like they're looking for consistency. So I think a lot of people would resonate with that, where sometimes they're more in a building phase with a client, and you have to do that for a period of time in order to hit the home run, or in order to create the real kind of product or make progress. Is there something specific that you did or that you found helped to overcome that, to create more consistency? Or because you mentioned also you add some additional services. So what specific kind of did you do to fill that void or deal with that situation?
It's like I have written the questions for you and just handed them to you.
Which is not the case, everybody.
That is not the case at all. But that's a perfect question, because what we did is we started to add services. So we added social media, we added content marketing, and we started to kind of figure out search engine marketing so that we could do some boosted content and native advertising, Google ads, and social media advertising as well. And as part of that, we didn't have a name. It was sort of the process of keeping things consistent and using the internet to be able to translate data into results. But I was writing about the process in the book, Spin Sucks. And my publisher came back to me and was like, after the first round of edits, and said, this process that you talk about in the book is really interesting. Does it have a name? And I was like, no. And she said, let's name it. And so we went back and forth, because it's paid media, earned media, shared media, and owned media. And what we looked at was, if you place that in importance, it would probably go owned, shared, earned, and then paid, or owned, earned, shared, and then paid. But when you're branding something, right, you have to do something that people remember. And so we were like, OSP, OSEP, that doesn't work. And we went back and forth and back and forth. And finally she said, what about peso? And I was like, can we use that? Because it's a Mexican currency. And, they went through the whole trademark piece and said, yeah, we can use it because it's a completely different thing.
Right.
And so when Spin Sucks, the book, was published, we for all intents and purposes, launched the peso model at the same time,
Right.
which is the model that we were using internally to be able to help our clients with that consistency.
Okay. So I want to come back to the actual model in maybe a couple of minutes. But I'm guessing, yeah, you probably couldn't create the peso NFT because then it might be a copyright trademark
Correct.
currency.
That's right.
Right.
That's
So,
right, yeah.
so no NFTs for you, which is like great that you don't have that right now. So you talked about launching these or adding these additional offers, and I'm wondering how do you do that without creating overwhelm or too much stress for your team? Because, you know, one of the ideas behind scaling a business is like simplicity, or subtraction is more powerful than addition. And so here, like, I understand the concept of you did this because you saw a bit of a gap. You're looking for ways to add more value for clients, maybe even to increase the average dollar value per client.
Yep.
Because you're providing more services. But more and more services means you need more processes, more systems, more people to learn different things. How did you, like, what was that conversation like, first of all, with your team? And then I'm wondering, how did you actually implement that in a way that didn't create all this kind of overwhelm and stress?
You're bringing me back. It was actually, we had a meeting and I said, this is we're no longer going to call ourselves a PR firm, is how I started. And I said, I'm investing in this model and I believe that this is the future. And I would love for you to come along with me. And if there are areas of the model that you would like to be proficient in, we'll get you some professional development. And if you decide that that's not the case, that for you, then that's fine. Half of the team quit. Half.
On that day, like, just tell me.
No, I would say within 10 days of that meeting.
And what do you think about
people.
About that discussion, or that kind of speech and the shift in the business? What do you think was really the cause for half the team to leave when you delivered that?
My sense is that they didn't believe that that was the future, and they thought I was like wacky and out there and not. I was putting too much at risk, I think they thought, and they thought that the business would go out of business, so they were going to get out before that happened. It's kind of fun now for them to come back and say, and some of them have come back to say, wow, I was really wrong.
That actually worked out. Yeah, I remember one of my English teachers back in high school. Was it high school? No, it was, well, actually it was high school, but it happened again in college, that they didn't think I could write anything. Like, they just thought I remember one thought I was cheating. I was like, whole thing.
What?
And then going like, and say, oh, actually I wrote a few books, like, I'm here. So it's like, your bet didn't really pan out. But anyways, is there anything go ahead. People,
I was gonna say people, like, come on.
Oh,
that's
I know.
Ridiculous.
Yes. But listen, that's what separates, in my mind, those who struggle from those who succeed. It's like, those who succeed ultimately are going to do things that maybe other people won't do. They're going to have to go against the grain. You're going to have to try things that other people aren't too scared to try.
That's a great point.
Right.
Yep.
But okay, take me back to that time. With the benefit of hindsight, is there anything that you would do differently in terms of how you delivered that message, or how you maybe tried to rally the team if you're going to be making, a big change? Anything you do differently?
I don't think so. I don't regret that at all. And truth be told, some of the people that left probably needed to.
Yeah.
So it was, I mean, for lack of a better term, an easy way to let people go about their lives without having to fire people or do layoffs. But the core people that were left, we really focused on, here, tell me what's of most interest to you, and we'll get that going for you. So we were able to create different career paths for them.
Right.
And then what we did to supplement, the 15 people who had left, is we hired contractors. So we hired, I remember we hired somebody who was really proficient in search engine marketing, and his sole job was to get us going, but then teach my team how to do that. So there were 3 people who were really interested in that piece. And that's what his job was for about 3 years. And when he and I felt like they were proficient enough to let them go on their own, we moved him into a different role. So those were the kinds of things that we were doing, because for the most part, everybody on my team were media relations experts. They weren't, they weren't writers. They weren't social media experts. Not that there were social media experts back then, but you know what I mean?
Sure.
And so it was really, how do we sort of move the team into areas where they have interest and get them the training they needed to be successful?
The other thing you talked about was, having a very clear opinion, and that's kind of where maybe things in the blog started to take off, right? So it was like, hey, we don't actually lie for a living. Here's what we really do. And those kinds of messages. I continue to observe that the messages that take off, like where you kind of get virality or where people really start to build an audience and have a following, is when you tend to have a stronger opinion.
Yes.
And maybe even to the degree of polarization, where
yeah,
I see people these days who will say things that if you really consume what they've put out, like that's not what they truly believe. Like they do believe it, but they're exaggerating it because they want to polarize. Like they just know they'll go a bit further than they really believe just to make a point. And I'm wondering, how do you think about that? I mean, you have a lot of experience in PR, in communications for consultants and experts and advisors who clearly they have knowledge, they have deep expertise. But oftentimes I see people kind of just like sitting right in the middle. They don't want to go one way or the other. They don't really want to have like an opinion that might polarize. They just want to kind of say what they say. But when they say what they say, it's like they're saying everything the same as everybody else. So
everybody else, yeah.
What advice would you offer to somebody who's wanting to, hook more people in, build that audience, stand out in the, from the crowd? But maybe there's some hesitation around like having too strong of an opinion and turning people off. So how do you think about that?
That's a really interesting conundrum, because it's a conversation we have a lot. We have this conversation a lot with clients in particular, because they don't want to be polarizing, because they're afraid of, making people mad or, scaring customers away or whatever happens to be. So it is kind of a struggle a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we really look for things that they say that you're like, that's it right there. And it does take, sitting in meetings, going to their staff meetings, going to their town halls, and just really listening to the way that they present things, because there's always something that they're saying or doing that I wouldn't necessarily call it polarizing, but it's different than what the industry is saying. And I'll give you a really good example. My brother is, one of my brothers sells cars, and he has done that since he was 17 years old. And he has decided that he's done selling cars and he wants to be a consultant, because he has figured out that the sales piece of it, that's a little bit different than some of, like the Grant Cardones of the world. Like he has something different. And so I've been trying to get him to do some content, and he did a video the other day. I was so proud of him, that said, the customer is not always right. And it's a message you hear sometimes from other people, but for the most part, you always hear like the customer is always right. You're always trying to appease them. And he's like, look, the customer is not always right. There are times that they're not right. And he did this whole video on it. And I was like, this is fantastic. And it is a little bit polarizing from the perspective of everybody says, well, the customer is always right. But it got him some attention for this new consulting business that he's launching, because people are like, well, wait a second. You're actually right. The customer is not always right. So how do we approach that perspective in a way that doesn't scare them away and make them mad and go write a bad review, but bring them into the fold, while also realizing that they're not going to get a $60,000 car for $25,000. Like this is not how it works. So those kinds of things, it's polarizing from the perspective that it's different from what most people say. But you're right that when he brought it around, it wasn't that different. We're still trying to attract the customer, and we're not like pushing them away, but they also have to be educated on how the process works. Yeah,
I think that's a great example. So thanks for sharing that. And so important, because far too often people don't spend the time actually thinking about, what is different? Like where do I have a bit of a differing view? Where do I have an insider advantage, or what's unique? I had this with a client the other day where they run a good size, 7-figure consulting business. And they're very general right now. And that's why they reached out to get some help. And I was like, what do you want to be known for? Like you need to be known for, so you can't just be another X type of consulting firm. It doesn't work. That's not going to help you to get to that next level. Regardless of what size you are, I think that's just such an important thing, is to really figure out, what do you want to be known for? What's your unique kind of perspective that is different? that will get you attention. So, okay, I want to get into your model in a minute here. Before we do that though, some people might have kind of caught this. This definitely caught my attention. So I'm going to be selfish and ask you about it. You run two companies, right? You have your agency.
Yep.
You have also Spin Sucks.
Yep.
How do you allocate your time to manage both companies so that they continue to do well, to grow, and not, drive yourself crazy at the same time?
Because they're so complementary, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, if I were to split up my time, it's probably 50-50. And some of the team overlaps. So it's not like I have, a whole team of direct reports on one side and another one on the other. But it complements each other so well, because what usually happens is a large company will call and say, hey, we really need some of your peso model training internally for our internal team. And so then we either do that on demand with the videos, online courses we already have, or depending on, maybe we do workshops, right? And then after that, what typically happens is they say, gosh, we really could use help implementing this. And so they hire the agency. So it works together so well that that's kind of a hard question to answer, just because it's not as
so they're two different entities, companies, but for all intents and purposes, it's almost like one. You could view it as one kind of program. They're sectioned off. Okay, so that makes sense. So let's shift into talking about marketing for a moment. You said companies, larger organizations are getting in touch with you. What are you doing right now to generate those high, quality leads and conversations? What kind of marketing, or how are you creating that kind of demand and inquiries?
I will tell you that the LinkedIn newsletter is the most underused tool. And now, as I'm going to say this, everybody's going to do a LinkedIn newsletter and the marketers will ruin it. But we have gotten so many leads from that alone. And we're repurposing content there. It's not like we're creating new content. We're repurposing our podcast. We're repurposing our blog posts to the LinkedIn newsletter that we publish once a week. And I'll bet 90% of our new clients in the last 18 months have come from that.
And okay, so some may be familiar that, if you are kind of creator status, so I don't know how LinkedIn kind of views it, but like not everybody can do this, I believe. I think many can. But if you have the ability to write an article, you can sign select them to create a newsletter around and so forth and publish. So in your case, you're publishing weekly. You said you're not writing brand new content just for that newsletter, you're repurposing. So let's just take the example of a podcast. What do you do from a podcast to repurpose that and then send that out in a way that would be valuable for people?
We take the transcript and we actually write an article from it, which is pretty easy to do. I've been using Cast Magic, which is a podcast AI, and I just throw the episode in there and it pumps out the transcript, but it also gives me newsletter copy. It gives me LinkedIn posts. It gives me Twitter. You can tell it whatever you want. It gives you headlines to choose from. And then we take that and edit it into something that's, readable, because it's not always, a transcript's not always readable. And then that's what we do. So, and then the CTA is, download and listen to the podcast or subscribe to the blog or join our community or whatever happens to be that coincides. But it has driven the interesting thing about it is we've had the audience for the blog is different than on LinkedIn. The LinkedIn audience is more business leaders, CEOs, decision makers, where the blog is more industry related. So even though the content's the same, we're finding the audience on LinkedIn is the audience we want to attract.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Anything outside of the LinkedIn newsletter that you're doing that you would say might be a second, in terms of value driving or results creating that you're doing from a marketing perspective?
I would say the podcast and the blog are probably neck and neck.
So is the vast majority of your marketing right now inbound from the sense of that you're putting content, people are coming to you, you're not doing any direct outreach to people or emails or nothing like that?
Nope.
Have you ever done that?
We have. Pre-pandemic we did, and it worked okay. But the advantage that we find with inbound marketing is we've already pre-sold them. And so there's no competition. They're not asking us to respond to RFPs. We don't have to do presentations. They already know they want to work with us.
Yeah.
Versus, you know, the direct, we found that I had a great sales team, but I always had to close. So the sales team could get it so far. And then I was the one who had to get on Zoom or on a plane or on a phone call to close it. And it got to be too much. So we really, and it took too long. The sales cycle was much, much longer. So we, you know, I mean, the pandemic certainly forced it, but we decided to focus on the inbound marketing because it's more effective.
Can you talk then for a moment? I mean, I think people would be interested in that, where those that are listening who are like the key business development salesperson, they're still also the founder. So they're wearing many hats. And sales is a big one that most founders tend to hold on to for quite some time. It sounds like now you've been able to shift away by focusing more on inbound. Is that correct? You have somebody else or maybe more than one person that handles sales. Just kind of talk about how you're handling those inquiries that come in from a sales perspective, if it's not you doing it all now.
So we have a team of 3 people that they do the qualification. So I'm still the one who closes, but they do the, you know, do they have the budget? Do they have the need? Are they ready to make a decision right now? Kind of, what's the timeline, that kind of thing.
And is that through email or is that a phone call or both? Or
usually it's on Zoom. It's usually a Zoom, you know, 30 or 45-minute conversation. And then once they decide that they're qualified, they come back to me with all of the data and everything. And then I have a Zoom conversation, usually with the salesperson and the prospect. But by that time, they're already pretty much sold. So then I can say, okay, based on what you've told me, we think we can help you do this, this, and this. And then we just go to scope of work and contract from there.
Does the salesperson share pricing information with the buyer before you've had the call, or do you save that for when you've had the call?
We typically save it because we don't really, the salesperson they don't have communications experience, so they don't really know. And because it's, you know, it varies so much depending on what they need. So usually that comes in. I mean, they will say, you know, we have a minimum engagement fee and this is what it is, but that's as far as it goes.
And so when the buyer says like, yeah, how much is it going to be? They would just respond, well, we have a minimum engagement fee of X. But when Gini speaks to you, you know, we'll be able to kind of go through that in more detail, something along those lines. And I think people will probably also be wondering this, why do it that way instead of, for example, having maybe somebody take over that's kind of final sales piece instead of you having to do it, get somebody else to do it. I'm sure you've considered that at one point or another, maybe you've even tried it, but what's your perspective or thoughts on that?
We've tried it. It doesn't work. And I don't know why. I have a really great sales leader. I mean, he's so good. And he and I have gone round and round and round on it. And for some reason, it just doesn't convert as much. So it could be that I'm the face of the company. It could be that my name's on the door. It could be that I'm the one that's out there, you know, doing all of the marketing. And they say, well, I want to have a conversation with her before. I mean, it could just be that, but we have tried it and it just doesn't work.
Okay. Interesting. That's an interesting one. I mean, it has to work. It's in some way, like companies scale without the founder doing the sales. But it's definitely a challenge. Like, I mean, we've seen this over the years where back in the day, I used to do all the sales, and then it's shifted and shifted and shifted. And, you know, we've been able to make a lot of progress in that area, but it's definitely challenging. It's not easy. So I feel you on that. Let's talk about the peso model. And I think what I'm wondering is, since we're talking about marketing, let's kind of bridge marketing into the peso model. Has having a model in your mind been a big factor in the success of the business, or with your marketing, or with your sales? And so for those who can't see the video, your head is nodding.
My head is nodding
up and down a lot.
And again. Yes.
So tell me about that. Like, for those that maybe don't have a model right now, or maybe have one kind of like sitting under their nose, but they haven't really developed it or branded it and, you know, named it and put it out there. How has having a model, that both kind of visual as well as a name, how has that helped you?
It has done a few things. So one of the smartest things I did without realizing I was doing it is we got the book Spin Sucks into classrooms. So anybody, and I would say probably at the start, it was like 5 or 10 colleges, universities, that anybody who was going through a PR program would read the book, and it was part of the curriculum. Eventually we started to grow that. And in 2020, right before everything went to hell in a handbasket, we launched the PESO model certification, and we started to go into schools with that, so that anybody who was graduating with a PR, advertising, marketing, or journalism degree in about 10 schools had a PESO model certification when they left. And because of that,
sorry to interrupt you. Were you charging the students to be certified?
We charge the schools.
Okay.
As part of, so the school will pay a fee, and then they can license it out to students like they would a textbook.
Okay, I'm going to put like a little pin in this because I want to come back to how did you sell into schools? That's, for a lot of people, that's a big challenge. But I interrupted you. I apologize. So keep going in terms of, so you did that, you had the certification, and how's that kind of helped?
So now we're having, at this point, well, last year we started to see graduates coming out of universities with PESO model certification. And now they're going into the workforce and they're saying, this is how we have to do things. And because of that, what we've seen is a big shift of large companies saying, okay, we have to figure this out, and you're the creator. And certainly there are lots of people out there who say that they do the PESO model, but we have the advantage of being the creator. We have the trademark, we invented it. So we have that advantage. But that, I think that's where we see the most play, is as these new college graduates are going into the workforce, they're saying, hey, this is backwards. This isn't how communications and marketing is done anymore. We have to start to look at this. And then they will hire us to come in and help train their teams.
I mean, I love this. So I think what's so powerful is, and I'm guessing that you would agree, that if you did not have a model, if it wasn't branded, if it wasn't kind of productized, if it was just an idea, like these 4 things are really important, it wouldn't stick. It's like that old, what's the acronym ADA in the advertising world? Attention, interest, desire, action, right? The reason that sticks is like, because it's been kind of, productized, like that you've turned it into a little mini product. It's branded. If it was just like, there's some important things when it comes to advertising, and they are, it wouldn't be memorable. So I see the value in doing that. Now I have to ask you, coming back to this, because I think it's like you're creating almost like this network effect, right? Where you're getting students to essentially adopt your model. And it's almost like somebody talking about tissue paper as Kleenex. Like, so now you go to buy Kleenex. It's not necessarily the Kleenex brand, but you're asking for Kleenex because like that's what everyone's talking about the PESO model. So they're going to organizations saying, yeah, we have to do things the PESO way. I don't know if you're using that, but maybe the PESO way. It kind of sounds cool.
Love it.
Right. But then people inside the organization, I would imagine, like if they've been there a while, maybe they have never heard of the PESO model. And so, oh, what's the PESO model? And now it's like, well, it's this and you do this and that. So that probably leads also to inquiries. But how did you sell into schools? Because so often, schools are like, no, we don't like to be sold to. We don't want outside vendors. We are neutral. We're Switzerland. Like, how did you make that happen?
The first way it happened is I found a publisher that did textbooks. So I worked with Pearson. And so that was number 1. And so we were able to use some of their connections. But number 2 is I built relationships with PR professors on Twitter. And that's what I did, is I built relationships. And when I went on the book tour, I made sure that I stopped by schools and did some guest lecturing, and I built the relationships with the PR professors, because every year what they do is they decide on books that they're going to have the students read. And sometimes they're textbooks and sometimes they're industry business books. And so it started to create that effect where, it started to roll all together, because now they were saying, oh, well, let's recommend that they read this book this semester. And then more and more professors started to hear about it, and it just sort of exploded from there.
And when you kind of pitched the idea of not only, will I come and do talks, and not only, you use a textbook or on my book, our book as a textbook, but we actually have the certification if you want to have your students certified. How was that received, and how did you actually pitch that to where they would be not only comfortable with like adding it as a resource link to their website, but actually I imagine they would probably need to put it in front of students and maybe even kind of quote unquote help to promote it. So what did that look like?
The first thing we did is we went to 3 universities and we said, we're launching this certification and we need a university to rubber stamp it. So we need a university to actually be the one to present the certificate. And we ended up building that relationship with Syracuse University. So if you get a PACE model certification, you also get the certificate from Syracuse. And so that was February of 2020. And so we let 2020 just go by because and we did that. So starting, I would say late 2021 and early of last year, I started going to the schools where I had relationships and saying, hey, we have this certification. This is what we do for students. This is this is what the typical cost is. Are you interested? And in some cases, they jumped on it immediately, depending on how big the school is. And some cases they had to go up the chain. So we just kept going at it. And finally, I hired somebody mid-year last year that his sole job now is to go into universities and sell it in.
How's that working? Having them doing that?
Awesome. We're in a lot.
Do you see a lot of opportunity for growth of just selling into universities?
Not really, because it's not really a profitable endeavor.
Okay.
It's really a long tail thing that we're doing, because then we anticipate that as these kids graduate, they go into the workforce, and that's where we see the real value. And
helping everyone that's joining us right now to kind of with setting of expectations. I mean, you talked about you had these relationships with people on Twitter, so professors, so on. If somebody was thinking that this concept, maybe it's not schools specifically, but just in terms of establishing relationships and selling into an organization that sometimes is known to be hard to sell into, how long would you say, you were building those relationships for before you made an offer, before you said, hey, here's what we have?
2 years.
Yeah.
Probably.
People often, I think, kind of look at and go like, well, yeah, I want this. That sounds like a great idea. I'm gonna pitch my stuff like next week, right? And it's like you haven't built a relationship. You're probably not going to get a good response. What advice would you have though for somebody with that? So maybe their struggle is they want to grow. They have this, they're getting this great idea from you right now, and they want to do something similar. They want to see a result, but if you say, hey, like you just need to focus on giving value and building a relationship, and it's going to take you at least 18 to 24 months to do that. For a lot of people, they go like, well, I got to pay my mortgage, or I got to put my kids through school, or I need to, whatever. I need more money. I need it faster. Give me the cash flow. How would you counsel? How would you advise somebody kind of who's thinking about that right now?
One of the things that we talk about a lot with our clients is intellectual property. So it's your mortgage is still being paid and your kids are still being put through school because you have a business over here doing that. And, everybody's freaking out right now about there's a recession coming in the US and, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And I keep saying it's such a great opportunity because you will have time to think about your intellectual property and you'll have time to start to build something. But just like you've built your company, it doesn't happen overnight. So you really have to think about it from that perspective. You can start to take what you have in your brains or the model that you use or your process that you use internally and start to productize it. But it takes time because you're building something new. So it's not an overnight success kind of thing. It's a multiple year kind of thing. But start now, plant your tree now. And in 5 years, you're going to be on this podcast having the same conversation.
I think it's such a great point. And it's one that I'm, I remind myself of constantly, like everything that we're doing is always for the long term. And I think if somebody is looking at their business or their kind of the path in front of them, thinking about, well, like I need to be ultra successful in societies or whatever, like that looks like in a very short period of time, you're probably going to be disappointed. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't work hard, but good things take time. And in some cases, there's a lot of things that are out of your control. So it's like not only to be excited about the destination, but actually make sure that you're enjoying the journey towards the destination. And that's going to give you kind of the power to outstay others. You touched on the economic kind of environment that we're in right now, where some people are seeing this as, as you are, which is it's a massive opportunity. that's how we view it. I spoke with Liz Wiseman, who wrote Multipliers and other books like that recently on the podcast. And, she told me that this is actually 2008 or so. That's when she wrote Multipliers with Greg McEwen.
Right.
Like she used that opportunity, right,
yes.
to do something wonderful that otherwise would have been maybe more challenging to do. So there's definitely a lot of people out there that look at the economic environment that we're in right now and all the uncertainty as an opportunity, but others are seeing that it is actually having a pretty big impact on their business. And
sure,
you have these two companies, you work with a lot of different clients, you talk to lots of people. What are you seeing right now in the environment, in kind of the business landscape? Number one, and then number two, I'm wondering what, if anything, have you done differently, made changes to your business and with your team?
So the first part of that question is we're hearing a lot of mumbling about, this is the first time, like somebody said to me the other day, this is the first time that I've been in business in the last 8 years that I've had this few clients like help me. And so there's a lot of that happening. And at the same time that that's happening, I think in the last 6 weeks, we've helped 5 or 6 clients message layoffs, communicate layoffs. So that's happening, which means they still need marketing and communication support, and their teams have been let go. Right. So we'll continue to fill that hole, but eventually we will be the next, right? So we're preparing for that. But one of the biggest things that I learned during the Great Recession, because the Great Recession crushed us. I mean, it completely crushed us. I was not expecting that at all. And certainly I was listening to economists are saying it's coming and, and I was like, I don't understand. Like, this is the best year we've had and we're crushing it. Right. And the 2 weeks between Christmas and New Year's from 2008 to 2009, I received letters from 90% of our clients canceling our contracts. Those 2 weeks between. And so on January 2nd, I had to go back into the office and lay off my team, most of them. Horrible. It was horrible. I was not expecting that at all. And to this day, some of them will say, I have one in particular that I keep in touch with, that she will say, if you had told us that this was coming, we could have helped you figure out ways to avoid the layoffs. And I was like, I didn't know it was coming, which was so stupid of me. It was so stupid. So now I'm prepared, right? But the biggest thing I learned from that is not to have all of your eggs in one basket. So we spent the time. I wrote a book. I went on book tour. I started to build online courses and do other things. So when the pandemic hit, it didn't affect us that much because while we lost some agency clients, we were still doing professional development for the industry. And we were able to rely on that to get us through the pandemic. So that is the one thing I will leave with everybody is if you do one thing, it's to start to find ways to diversify your revenue sources. So if you do consulting, do you have some intellectual property that you can create online courses or professional development around? Like those are the kinds of things that you should be thinking about. It's not going to save you right now because it is a longer term play. But if you figure out how to diversify your revenue sources, you will make it through the next one and the one after that and the one after that. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I mean, we're having these kinds of conversations with some clients. I mean, some clients are like reporting, we're having our best year ever, which is fantastic, right? Which is like, okay, that's great. And then others they're fearful, or they're just really unsure of like what's going to happen. So we're having lots of conversations, but the advice that you're giving is what we're saying to a lot of people. That's great. Like look at client concentration. Don't have too much business with one client. And also, what are other ways that you can build an audience or strengthen relationships, or as you talked about, create online programs or other things that you can do, because having everything or too many eggs in one basket, as you said. Is there anything else that you're doing? I mean, you mentioned preparing, and that the first time around you weren't really prepared because you didn't know what was coming. This time you are preparing. Is there anything beyond what you just mentioned that you are doing from a preparation kind of perspective that maybe others could benefit from? Yeah, I mean, it's not a fun conversation to have, but we definitely have our scenarios. So scenario A is if we lose this client and this much revenue, then we have to do this and this and this. If we lose this much revenue, then we have to. So we have the scenario planning. We've started to tighten our belts in terms of, expenses that we don't really need to spend money on, like subscriptions and things like that. But for the most part, we just sort of know what the plan is so that if something triggers, we know what we have to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good advice. And on the cost cut, I mean, one thing that I always share with people is don't just like blatantly cut everything. Like just be very clear about
Yes.
what creates value. So it's always like, yeah, if you have a subscription to some service that you never use and you don't get value from, like, yeah, cut it. You shouldn't have,
Right.
you don't need that. But if you're working with somebody or you're paying for something, you're investing in something and you're getting value from that, like either it's delivering actual business value, or it's helping you to be a better person, or it's making you smarter, or it's good for your health or whatever. Keep those things, because you need those things to not only survive what might be coming, but also to actually thrive, because so many people will fall down. You know, they're not going to make it, and you don't want to be one of them. And so you want to do the things to get to the other side. Okay, Gini, this is fantastic. I want to be respectful of the time that we have on the calendar. But I do want to wrap up with maybe just 2 final questions. The first is, you have a lot going on. I'm wondering, what are 1 or 2 habits for you on a daily basis that you feel really contribute to, your ability to perform at high levels?
I ride my bicycle and I race it, and I don't like.
You race your bicycle? Like on the streets of Chicago?
Yes.
Do you have like, I don't know, some big inflatable protection bubble around you?
No, I've got, I mean, I've had some accidents. I've broken a few bones, but yeah.
But you still do it. You get out there. Okay.
But yeah. Right. And that nothing interrupts that. Like every once in a while I have a client who will text me or something during, and I'm like, nope, you cannot, I am not available between these hours. It just don't interrupt. And what I have found is that, first of all, I'm highly competitive. So it allows me to get that out of my system before I come to work and try to compete with my team.
So you do this in the morning?
Yes.
Okay.
And it also helps me prepare for the day, because, I'm on my bike for an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it gives me time to think. And there are lots of things that we are struggling with clients that we don't have an answer to. And I can come up with solutions when I'm just by myself thinking. And my team's favorite thing is when I say, so I was on my bike this morning, and they all go, oh
yeah, here we go again.
Okay. So I would say that's number one. I mean, I have to do that every day.
So what time do you typically do that? Go for a bike
5 to 7.
Okay. And is that even in the Chicago winters?
Yeah, I'm downstairs on the Peloton during the winter.
Got it. Okay. So indoors, winter, summer, better weather, you're outdoors.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's, any kind of exercise, things like that are fantastic. And then final question, before I thank you and ask you to where people should go to learn more, is in the last 6 months or so, is there a book, fiction or nonfiction, that you really enjoyed either reading or listening to that you'd recommend to others?
Man, I read so much. That's like asking me my favorite child.
Oh, you must have one. A favorite child, that isn't.
Well, yeah, but I can't actually say
exactly.
It. She's sitting right there.
And I was pointing to the dog. Everybody was just
there's a puppy behind me.
Yeah.
All she does is sleep. That's all she does. Best book. I just finished reading Bullseye Marketing, which is Louis Kaduma's second edition. And the thing I like about it is it covers everything. So if you want to do email marketing, I would just keep it on your desk as a reference check. If you want to do email marketing, you open to that chapter and you just refresh yourself on things. If you're launching into influencer marketing, you've never done that before, you open to that chapter and refresh yourself on those kinds of things. So I would say that's a pretty good desk reference kind of book that you can just keep around.
Bullseye Marketing. We will link that up in the show notes as well. And then, Gini, finally, thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed our conversation. And I know that we've just kind of scratched the surface. There's so much more that you have going on. And so for those that would like to learn more about you, about your company, about everything, that you're up to, where's the one place that's best for them to go?
Spinsucks.com.
There we go.
So easy.
That's so easy. Yes.
It's so easy.
So easy. So good. All right, Gini, thank you again so much for coming on.
Thank you. This has been fantastic. I can't believe how fast it went by.